No human being has ever officially confirmed having sex in space. And yet, solving the problem of extraterrestrial reproduction might be the single most important challenge facing humanity's future as a spacefaring species. This is the story of why space agencies spent 60 years dodging the subject, why the physics alone would make you miserable, and why a handful of scientists now warn that if we don't figure this out soon, every plan to colonize Mars rests on a biological lie. Let's start with the question everybody asks but nobody at NASA wants to touch. The moment you reach orbit, about 2 liters of blood shift from your lower body toward your head. Your face bloats, your legs thin out. Astronauts call it puffy face, chicken legs. And it happens because blood pressure in the lower extremities drops as the cardiovascular system scrambles to recalibrate. Sexual arousal depends on targeted blood engorgement in very specific body parts. And that upward redistribution works directly against it. A 2023 study in the FASEB Journal by Andrade and colleagues confirmed this worry. They exposed rats to conditions simulating both microgravity and galactic cosmic radiation, and the animals showed long-term impairment of erectile function persisting 12 to 13 months after exposure. Not a temporary dip. Lasting damage, driven primarily by galactic cosmic radiation increasing oxidative stress in the tissue. But here's the thing. Because anecdotal evidence tells a completely different story. Retired NASA astronaut Mike Mullane stated publicly that he experienced powerful erections in space. His exact words to Men's Health were that he would wake from sleep periods with erections he could have drilled through kryptonite. Animal models point one direction, astronaut experience points the other. And the reason nobody can settle the debate is that controlled human data barely exists. Even if arousal works fine, Newton's third law creates a problem that nobody has solved. Every push generates an equal and opposite reaction, and without gravity providing friction or a stable surface, 2 people attempting intercourse drift apart with every movement. Biologist Athena Andreadis at the University of Massachusetts described it bluntly. You have no traction and you keep bumping against the walls. You have no friction. You have no resistance. Neil deGrasse Tyson's advice on Star Talk was equally direct. Just bring a lot of leather belts. And that's before we talk about fluids. Sweat doesn't drip in microgravity. It clings to your skin as a film and keeps building. Free-floating liquids form spherical globules because of surface tension, and there's no buoyancy-driven convection to help your body shed heat. Reduced evaporative cooling stacks on top of that. Picture an uncomfortably hot, humid, slippery experience surrounded by floating droplets of everything your body produces. Core body temperature also creeps up about 1 degree Celsius over the first 2.5 months in space, and stays elevated, according to a 2017 study in Scientific Reports. Add vigorous physical exertion to an already elevated baseline inside an environment where your body can't cool itself efficiently, and the romantic zero-gravity fantasy that movies sell starts to look a lot less appealing. Part 2. Hormones, radiation, and fertility. Mechanics aside, the real concern isn't whether people can have sex in space. It's whether they can reproduce. Hormonal shifts in orbit are documented but inconsistent. Smith and colleagues studied 15 male astronauts during 4 to 6 month ISS stays in 2012, and total testosterone held steady during flight but dropped sharply on landing day. An earlier 1998 study by Strollo found testosterone decreased after 4 to 5 days on the space shuttle, though those crews were also under-eating, which muddies the picture. Self-rated sexual drive dipped during spaceflight in parallel with those testosterone shifts, and cortisol painted a more dramatic picture. Skylab data showed 8 out of 9 astronauts had elevated cortisol, and a 2025 study of Virgin Galactic passengers recorded a 51% spike after a single suborbital flight. Radiation is where everything gets dire. 3 types dominate the space environment. Galactic cosmic rays, which are highly energetic protons, alpha particles and heavy ions traveling at extreme speeds, solar particle events from flares and coronal mass ejections, and trapped radiation in Earth's Van Allen belts. 0.5 millisievert per day. That's what astronauts absorb on the ISS, roughly 150 to 300 times Earth's background rate. During Mars transit, the dose climbs to 1.8 millisieverts per day, the equivalent of about 18 chest X-rays every 24 hours. A full Mars round trip would deliver roughly 1,000 millisieverts total, linked to a 3 to 7% jump in lifetime fatal cancer risk, and NASA's own career limit sits at 600 millisieverts. A Mars mission would blow right past it. For reproduction, the gonads rank among the most radiation-sensitive organs in the body. Heavy ions cause dose-dependent depletion of ovarian reserves through oxidative damage and DNA double-strand breaks in egg cells. Sperm DNA fragmentation also climbs under combined microgravity and radiation exposure. One study measured fragmentation rates of about 29% in radiation-exposed workers, nearly double the 15% seen in controls. Male animals fare badly under simulated microgravity. 6 weeks of hind limb suspension in rats produced complete absence of mature sperm, and 3 months aboard the ISS caused marked reduction in mouse sperm counts. Decreased testicular blood flow from the fluid shift appears to disrupt the entire production chain. There is one piece of reassuring news for women. Menstruation occurs normally in microgravity because menstrual blood flows via uterine contractions, not gravity, and retrograde menstruation, which was an early concern, never materialized. Most female astronauts on long-duration missions suppress menstruation using continuous oral contraceptives, and a 3-year Mars mission would burn through about 1,100 pills. Part 3. The animal experiments. Sex would be physically awkward. Radiation threatens fertility. But can life actually begin off Earth? And can an embryo develop? And can offspring survive? The animal experiment record goes back decades, and the results bounce between encouraging and grim. 5 female rats and 2 males orbited for 18.5 days aboard the Soviet Cosmos 112-29 mission in 1979, housed in a dedicated breeding chamber. Post-flight analysis confirmed ovulation, copulation, and fertilization had occurred, but no females delivered young. Ground controls in identical hardware also failed to breed, which pointed to environmental stress from the equipment rather than microgravity itself. Simpler organisms fared better. African clawed frog eggs were successfully fertilized in microgravity on the Texas 17 sounding rocket in 1988, and those embryos established bilateral symmetry without gravity, using only the sperm entry point as a cue. Between 1996 and 1999, Spanish ribbed newts aboard the Mir station produced nearly normal larvae from space-fertilized eggs, with no genetic abnormalities through the second generation. March 22, 1990 brought a genuinely historic moment. Commander Alexei Solovyov incubated 48 Japanese quail eggs aboard Mir, and on that day the first quail chick hatched in space, making it the first vertebrate born outside Earth's atmosphere. 8 of 33 chicks hatched total, but none could orient or feed themselves in microgravity. 4 years later came the first vertebrate mating beyond Earth. On STS-65 in 1994, 4 Japanese Medaka fish mated, laid 43 eggs, and 8 fry hatched in orbit. Dr. Kenichi Ijiri documented normal germ cell counts in those fry, and they later produced healthy offspring back on the ground. Mammals told a much darker story. Mouse 2-cell embryos launched on STS-80 in 1996 and cultured for 4 days all degenerated, while Earth controls developed normally. Then there's Nadezhda. In 2007, this female cockroach flew aboard Russia's Photon-Ning 3 biosatellite for 12 days and returned to Earth, where she produced 33 offspring reportedly conceived during spaceflight. Their chitinous shells darkened earlier than normal, but grandchildren developed without issues. The gecko story is just tragic. A Russian satellite carrying 4 female and 1 male gecko launched in 2014 for a 44.5-day reproduction study, but equipment failed, and all 5 animals died. Complete loss. Part 4. The breakthrough. Everything shifted in October 2023, with the most important mammalian reproduction result in the history of space science. Professor Teruhiko Wakayama's team at the University of Yamanashi, collaborating with JAXA and Riken, had launched 720 frozen 2-cell stage mouse embryos to the ISS on SpaceX CRS-23 back in August 2021. Astronauts thawed them using a specially designed incubator and cultured them for 4 days under both microgravity and artificial 1G conditions. Out of 360 samples analyzed, 17 developed into normal blastocysts with proper cell differentiation. The gene expression profiles under microgravity turned out to be indistinguishable from the 1G controls. Mammalian embryos could develop normally without gravity. One wrinkle stood out. About 25% of microgravity blastocysts had their inner cell mass split into 2 locations, compared to only 6 to 7% in ground controls, hinting that gravity might help cells coalesce during early development. Overall survival rates ran lower on the ISS than on Earth, likely because of radiation exposure. iScience published these results on October 27, 2023. This built on Wakayama's earlier sperm work. Freeze-dried mouse sperm launched to the ISS in August 2013 returned in batches over 9 months, 3 years, and nearly 6 years. Every single batch produced healthy mouse pups. X-ray extrapolation suggested freeze-dried sperm could survive over 200 years in space, though that resilience partly comes from the lack of water molecules in freeze-dried samples, which gives them much higher radiation resistance than fresh tissue. The bottom line, after decades of failed or ambiguous experiments, we now have evidence that early mammalian embryonic development can proceed in microgravity. That's encouraging. But no mammalian species has ever completed a full reproductive cycle in space, from conception through birth to sexual maturity. Not once. Part 5. The Great Institutional Silence. If this question matters so much, why hasn't anyone studied it properly? The answer boils down to institutional embarrassment. NASA has never released a formal written policy on sexual intercourse in space, even though conception is effectively prohibited and pregnancy remains a contraindication to spaceflight. Bill Jeff, spokesperson for Johnson Space Center, put it flatly. We don't study sexuality in space, and we don't have any studies ongoing with that. If that's your specific topic, there's nothing to discuss. When 538 tried to interview NASA's top reproductive biology scientist, April Ronca, in 2017, the agency blocked the request. Kelly Humphreys, acting news chief at NASA Ames, told the reporter, NASA is not focused on sex in space at this time. Former NASA science communicator Laura Faye Tenenbaum described the culture in Slate. In April 2025, she asked a colleague whether NASA had overheard astronauts having sex via audio monitoring. The colleague replied, "I don't have authority to disclose that information," while smirking, then turned away and began giggling like a maniac. Tenenbaum's reading of that exchange, she'd said it without saying it. Yes, sex happens. Yes, NASA can hear them. And no, they'll never admit it. That's an anecdotal claim from a former employee, so take it for what it is. Shauna Pandya from the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences captured it well on a Scientific American podcast in February 2024. "I think there must have been this rumor floating around NASA for the longest time that if they discussed sex in space, they would go blind or something like that. Because historically speaking, NASA very much took a Disney approach. The closest the agency has come to cracking the door open was a 2022 statement responding to a space sexology research proposal. A representative offered, "Should a future need for more in-depth study on reproductive health in space be identified, NASA would take the appropriate steps." Researchers read even that tepid sentence as a departure from decades of flat rejection. Which brings us to the story everyone wants to hear. Mark Lee and Jan Davis are the only confirmed married couple to have flown together on a NASA mission. They served as mission specialists on STS-47, the Space Shuttle Endeavour, launched September 12, 1992. They met during training, married secretly in January 1991, and revealed their marriage to NASA shortly before launch, too late to train replacements after 3 years of preparation. An unwritten rule against married couples flying together already existed at the time, mainly over team dynamics and the risk of orphaning children, and after the mission, NASA formalized it into written policy. Both Lee and Davis have consistently refused to answer questions about intimate activity during the flight. At a pre-mission press conference, Davis denied that intimate activities would occur. The couple divorced in 1999. And here's the absurd detail. That exact same mission, STS-47, carried a science payload that involved artificially inseminating frog eggs. The only married couple in NASA history orbiting together, while the lab next door is literally running reproduction experiments. You genuinely cannot make that up. No other major space agency, not ESA, not Roscosmos, not JAXA, not the Canadian Space Agency, has publicly released a specific policy either. Valery Bogomolov, deputy director of Russia's Institute of Biomedical Problems, stated, "There is no official or unofficial evidence that there were instances of sexual intercourse or the carrying out of sexual experiments in space." Part 6. When Humans Collide. Before we get to the romantic possibilities of space, the intersection of humans, isolation, and intimacy has already produced disturbing incidents. During the S-Fine CSS-99 ground-based isolation simulation in 1999, designed to prepare for ISS missions, a Russian commander forcibly kissed Canadian researcher Judith Lapierre on New Year's Eve. 2 Russians got into a bloody fistfight the same night. When Lapierre filed a complaint, the Canadian Space Agency told her such behavior was normal for Russians. Russian coordinator Vadim Gushin brushed it off, In the West, some kinds of kissing are regarded as sexual harassment. In our culture, it's nothing. Lapierre was effectively pushed out of the space sector, and while the incident shaped ISS harassment policies, it also exposed how badly space agencies handle the human dimensions of intimacy and power. That matters enormously when you consider mission timelines. A conjunction-class Mars round trip runs about 34 months. An opposition-class trip lasts roughly 15 months. Small groups of people in tight quarters for years. NASA advisor Dr. Jason Kring at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University framed it clearly. Like hunger and thirst, sex is a basic biological motive. The potential round-trip mission to Mars could take 3 years. It doesn't make sense to assume that these men and women are going to have no thoughts of it for 3 years. Part 7. The people trying to fix this. Despite the institutional silence, a small number of researchers and private companies are pushing forward. Spaceborne United stands out as the most prominent private venture, a Dutch biotech startup founded by Dr. Egbert Edelbroek that claims to be the only company actively seeking to develop a human embryo in space. Their ARTIS program envisions a disc-based mini-lab that mixes sperm and egg cells, creates embryos under simulated gravity in orbit, then cryogenically freezes them for return to Earth. The roadmap has hit repeated delays. A planned suborbital test from Iceland got scrubbed over launch permit issues, and an orbital test with German startup Atmos Space Cargo slipped to align with Atmos's Phoenix capsule development, which completed its first orbital re-entry test in April 2025. As of late 2023, Spaceborne United had raised $400,000 in venture capital, with Professor Christopher Mason from Weill Cornell Medicine on the advisory board. Elon Musk envisions a million-person Mars colony by around 2050 but has not addressed the reproduction question in any systematic way. Kelly Weinersmith, a Rice University biologist and co-author of the Royal Society science book prize-winning A City on Mars, put it directly. I don't think we're going to have babies on Mars. On the academic side, the emerging field of space sexology is led by Simon Dubé at the Kinsey Institute and Maria Santaguida at Concordia University. Dubé has pressed this point publicly. There is a harmful misconception that research in space sexology is not urgent or important. At the moment, space organizations are seemingly waiting for problems to arise, rather than proactively ensuring we have the necessary knowledge. This must change now. Santaguida laid out the scope even wider. In space, we face obstacles regarding almost every aspect of human eroticism, from all stages of reproduction, to sexual activities, relationship building, and breakups, to consent, power dynamics, and challenges related to justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. One person actually tried to build a practical fix. Italian-American writer and inventor Vanna Bonta experienced microgravity during a 2004 parabolic flight, realized physical contact was nearly impossible, and created the two-suit, a garment with Velcro panels and bungee cords allowing two suits to dock together for leverage. Testing aboard a parabolic flight aircraft in September 2008 required 8 attempts before 2 subjects, Bonta and her husband Alan Newcomb, managed to successfully embrace. The History Channel featured it on The Universe in December 2008, but the suit never reached actual space. Bonta passed away in 2014, and Santaguida is now building a replica with permission from her estate. Part 8. The Gravity Prescription. Everything in this story leads to what might be the most important unanswered question in space biology. Former NASA physician Dr. Jim Logan calls it the gravity prescription, meaning the minimum gravity level needed for healthy conception, gestation, birth, and development. Mars provides only 0.38 grams, about a third of Earth's gravity. The Moon sits even lower at 0.16. Whether either level suffices for human reproduction is entirely unproven. We have zero data. Minimum viable population for a self-sustaining space colony is itself a fierce debate. Estimates span from 22 people, from a widely criticized, non-peer-reviewed 2023 preprint, to 98 to 110 people from genetic viability studies by Marin and Beluffy in 2018, all the way up to 10 to 40,000 according to Cameron Smith at Portland State University for long-term genetic health. Stored genetic material could supplement a smaller physical population, but the core question persists: can a human pregnancy reach full term off Earth? A February 2026 paper in Reproductive Biomedicine Online, co-authored by NASA scientist Dr. Fathi Karuya, declared that IVF technologies in space are no longer purely speculative, and called the need for ethical frameworks urgent. Karuya's message was clear. As human presence in space expands, reproductive health can no longer remain a policy blind spot. The ethical weight is heavy. A space-conceived child cannot consent to the developmental risks imposed by radiation and microgravity. Rapidly dividing embryonic cells rank among the most radiation-vulnerable biological tissues, and transgenerational genomic instability from irradiated gametes is a documented risk. These decisions would affect people who don't yet exist and can't speak for themselves. Dr. Chris Lenhart at George Washington University identified the core problem. If you were to take reproduction and break it down into all of its various parts, there's never really been a dedicated scientific program that looked at how each of these steps is affected. Part 9. So where does that leave us? Before the 1973 launch of Skylab's first crew, researchers worried that astronauts could develop infected prostate glands from prolonged celibacy, and a doctor encouraged the crew to masturbate regularly. The astronauts reportedly ignored the advice. Russia's cash-strapped space program briefly considered filming a risque sci-fi scene aboard Mir for revenue, but the project never materialized. Pornhub announced in 2015 it would crowdfund the first adult film shot in space, $236,000. That's all they raised of a $3.4 million goal, and the campaign collapsed. Virgin Galactic rejected a $1 million offer to host a similar production. The jokes land easily on this topic, but behind every one of them sits a serious reality. The scientific community is only now confronting $130 million. That's NASA's entire human research program budget, and from it, essentially nothing flows towards studying the question that determines whether permanent human settlement beyond Earth is even biologically possible. No mammalian species has completed a full reproductive cycle in space as of today. Not from conception through birth, not from birth through sexual maturity. The JAXA mouse embryo results are encouraging, and the freeze-dried sperm experiments demonstrate that genetic material can survive orbit. But between early embryonic development and a healthy baby lie hundreds of biological steps we've never tested. Colonization timelines aren't waiting for the science. SpaceX is developing Starship. NASA's Artemis program aims to establish a sustained lunar presence. Mars missions are being planned for the 2030s and 2040s. Every one of these programs assumes humans can eventually sustain a population off-world, and not a single one has confronted the most basic biological prerequisite for making that work. Simon Dubé put it simply on the Scientific American podcast in February 2024. Eventually, if we want to settle another world, we need to deal with reproduction, obviously. But we also need to deal with sex, with falling in love, with the challenges and complexity of human eroticism beyond Earth. Whether humans will try to have sex in space is no longer the question. Whether we'll understand the consequences before they do, that's the one that matters. Thanks for watching. If you learned something, leave a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the science shaping our future. Drop a comment below. Should space agencies invest in this research now, or is it too early? I'll see you in the next one.